So without further ado, I'm going to move on to our panel session now, and I'm going to invite our panelists to come up on the stage. And we're going to start our Q&A session, if that's all right. And I'm delighted that Cara Jones from CIFA is actually going to help me. But let's get the panel up here. So first of all, can I ask Andy Heald from AOC to come up to the panel, please? Thank you for being here, Andy. Next up, we have got Brendan Wilkins. Brendan, thank you, from Dig Ventures. Then Jeanette Plummer-Sires. So Jeanette is a founding member of the European Society for Black and Allied Archaeologists. She's also the chair of the Archaeological Achievement Awards judging panel, and she is a CBA trustee. Next up, can we have Sarah Jane Clements? So Sarah Jane is obviously one of the founding members of the Enabled Archaeology Foundation. Sarah Jane, it's great to have you here. Next, Katie Sanderson, who is a committee member of CIFA's Early Careers SIG. Thank you, Katie. And then Eva Murray, who is from our Youth Advisory Board, 4th year undergraduate at Edinburgh University, about to enter the workforce, all you archaeological employers. Okay, excellent young graduate there who would like a job. And then can I ask Nina O'Hare? So Nina is the lead of the outreach team for the Worcestershire Archive and Archaeological Service. And then finally, we're going to ask our wonderful Gail Boyle, chair of the CBA's trustees, back up to the panel. Okay, here's your panel, everybody. Okay, so this is going to run like question time. Okay, so I'm going to try and be Jeremy Paxman, or rather a dwarf version of Jeremy Paxman. That's fine. And Cara is going to be Fiona Bruce. Okay.
Nice.
All right. So we're going to rove around, and we are going to ask if you've got any questions, and then we're going to put them to the panel. If you want a specific person on the panel to ask that question, please say their name and point it out to them. Okay. Panelists have all been warned. We want everyone to be able to talk. So if you create a very long answer, Jeremy Paxman will tell you to be quiet, okay, and move on. Now, I have to say, every single member of the panel have been chosen because we think they've got really interesting lived experience. No matter who or what backgrounds they're actually at, lived experience is really important in this conversation. So please, you know, they are volunteering to do this, so have the utmost respect for them, and let's just see where our conversation goes. Thank you. Actually, I should probably just ask the first question. We have a prepared question that we've obviously gently introduced the panel to, and Cara is going to kick that one off.
I am. So first question I'd love you all to consider is, what is the key challenge archaeology faces as a sector in the next 10 years? And I'd love to start with Jeanette with that one.
Okay. I've been thinking long and hard about this one, and it actually relates to what we've been discussing in the session already. I believe one of the issues is going to be convincing people that archaeology is relevant in the discussions that are really going to be shaping the world beyond sort of our sector. What seems astounding to me is that archaeology hasn't been part of conversations about climate emergency, that archaeologists, we have environmental archaeologists who have literally dedicated their life to mapping the history of humans interacting with their environment. The fact that we're not more active in conversations about policies. Archaeology has told us that when the climate has changed in the past, people migrate. People look for different areas for their safety, for their food. Why aren't we talking about what that might look like for us? We still demonize different groups depending on the reasons in which they have to seek refuge elsewhere, depending on how we perceive them. Why aren't archaeologists more involved in these conversations? So I think part of that task is going to be convincing people that archaeology is more than how we've defined it to be this far. And that's not just going to be a definition of the public, but also how we see archaeology holding meaning within the sector. And I think it's going to be important. I think there's a lot of value, there's a lot of knowledge. And I, like Neil was saying, I think it's going to be a little bit challenging because we have siloed ourselves so close to irrelevance that it's going to take a lot of work. But I believe that we can do it, and I believe that it's going to be really valuable work.
I love that answer. It's amazing. Has anyone else got any thoughts they might want to sort of pitch in with that?
So,
Brendan,
yes,
step up.
okay, I will. To follow up on that, I completely agree with everything you're saying. I think climate change, nature recovery has two impacts. It has impacts on archaeology, but also archaeology as a discipline as well. We've been doing a lot of work in nature recovery with ecologists, looking at landscape nature recovery strategies and so on. And one of the things I asked them in those meetings at the end is, what do you think is the main barrier to this work happening? And on more than several occasions, they said to me, well, actually, no offense, but it's the archaeologists. Now, it's not just a knee-jerk reaction. They give me some really quite reasoned answers to why they think that's the case. They think that what we perceive as change is a problem. We like to conserve and stop change, whereas what they perceive as change is good. When something changes, it's a signifier that they're doing the right job. Now, I think that if that is the professional default setting for archaeologists, as climate change really starts to wash over us, then it's all curtains. We need to change how we think about our practice, and we need to get in front of that argument. Otherwise, there won't be much legacy for the profession.
Okay, awesome. Right, let's go to the floor. Anybody got a question? You want to put your hand up? We can get you a mic. Come on, you've all got a question. Okay, excellent. Andrea Bradley, thank you very much.
So you said that process is killing creativity in archaeology. And I wondered how our panel feels about that, particularly considering that we do a lot of our work within a process. How are we gonna fight that? How are we gonna come up against that and be more creative within the process that we're operating in?
Okay, let's go to Gail first.
So I'm on public record as having said this. What archaeology has done over the last 30 years is created all of these standards and practices that write us out of the process. The human quality of what we do is not evident to people anymore. I have no pictures in archives of people actually digging things up because they are not required as part of the standards that we have set ourselves. So if there's one thing that we can do, is we need to put our own stories back into the process. We need to make it human again. Those are the stories, absolutely, M-shared, people-focused, story-led. It's quite a hard thing for archaeologists to do because we don't know the names of people generally that died X thousands of years ago, but we do know the names of the people that dug them up. 30 years ago, I know the names. They worked in the museum. They don't work in the museum anymore. I don't know the names of the people that are digging them up now because they don't work with me. And that is a real failing. We are failing to collect the social history and the context in which we are working as archaeologists. And we are doing our subject a disservice in the process.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gail. Sarah Jane.
Yeah, what Gail said then, it's just reminded me of something then about how we don't have many pictures of disabled archaeologists, which has been a problem, you know, for us at the EAF when we're looking to do talks and things and people contacting us, and we just don't have those images. But what I'd like to say is I think there's a lot of issues around pay for disabled people. I know people who are having to take second jobs and we have extra costs associated with being disabled. It's £975 that would be needed to have the same standard of living as a non-disabled household. So on top of the low pay and the low wages we're getting, we also have all these extra costs as well. And also, my own research shows that disabled people are highly qualified. We know that archaeologists in general are highly qualified anyway, but disabled archaeologists are as well, but they're actually paid lower. So I think it's another issue.
Brilliant. Anybody else on the panel want to come in? No. Cara, anyone from the floor want to respond?
I think we've got a question right in front of you there.
So a couple of you have already spoken about having to change the definitions of archaeology and having to reintroduce creativity. Do you see archaeology becoming more multidiscipline in the future? And if so, how will that raise questions in professionalism and the professional standards that we've set?
Do you have anyone you want to put that to? Okay, so I'm going to start with Nina, if that's all right. Sorry.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about that. That's quite an interesting one. So I come at this from a perspective of working for a local authority. I'm a little bit of an unusual setup, but I work in an outreach team allied with a commercial archaeology unit. So you're right that I think we're very good at putting ourselves in boxes in archaeology. That someone does this, someone else does that job, and it's all quite neatly compartmentalized. And I think that's one of the things that has not made us very good at change and drawing new things into the profession. I find that a lot still. Community engagement in commercial projects is still very much viewed as an add-on, as much as it is not in a lot of cases. So I guess I don't know whether I have the answers for quite how we change that and what it's going to look like in the future. But I suppose it's something that we probably need to go down the route of training archaeologists more in a wider range of things, rather than everyone being in a very neat little box. And you are just an environmental archaeologist or an illustrator, and those are all very important specialist skills. And that's not to take away from all those very important specialist skills and recognizing where specialism is needed. But whether, I don't know whether anyone else has got any thoughts, but whether that sort of slightly broader understanding, even if you've not got the specialist skills, that understanding of how everything in archaeology does join up together, I guess is probably something that we would all benefit more from.
Thank you. Andy, I wonder if you could give just a quick reflection from the perspective of the commercial world on this, how you operate as a multidisciplinary business where you're actually also in this very confined area of operation.
I'm sort of a natural optimist, so I'm also the chair of the Scottish Archaeology Committee, and over the 4 years it's taught me that I think there's loads of collaboration going on in the sector, and I think we've got a tendency to always sort of talk ourselves down. So we've seen the stats today where there's clearly lots of work to do in a number of areas, but we've probably got 68 million hits on digital stuff, probably got more people employed in archaeology. I actually think there's loads of collaboration. I mean, I saw national highways frameworks with Jim. I think there's actually loads of collaboration, lots of multidisciplinary work. So yeah, there's loads to do, but yeah, I think there's a tendency that we talk archaeology down quite a lot, and I think there's actually quite a lot of impressive work being done. And I think the danger to archaeology at the moment is that. And if you're at the innovation session, Clive's point about the golden triangle is critical. The whole where there needs to be more or increased collaboration is the clients, the design teams, the curators, and the delivery teams, regardless who that is. And I generally think it's happening. I think the big opportunity is there. I think you're right. There needs to be a time where people like me be quiet and let the new generation take over. But I think we leave it in quite a good place, actually. But maybe that's me.
Gail, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to go kind of like in the opposite direction, because I think we've always been multidisciplinary. And that's the beauty of archaeology. We are multidisciplinary. What we don't do very well is join up the dots between us and talk about that. And actually, if we think about public engagement, museum archaeologists do that all day, every day. That's what we do. We have those skill sets that we can provide to the commercial sector, but nobody's coming knocking on our door to do it. We would love to do it. It would support us because potentially we get paid to do that. Therefore, regional museums would not be losing the staff because we've got a commercial reason to actually exist. There are ways that we could all support each other better to join those things together. So for me, it's always been multidisciplinary.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I'm Jessica Lowther from Headland Archaeology. I'm a community archaeologist. I'd just like to contribute a little bit to that question and conversation about, being better at being joined up and being better about maybe, like Nina said, sort of educating archaeologists in doing lots more things or getting, that. I think I'd like to come at that from a slightly different perspective. And the way I've learned more about archaeology is just having conversations with other people that work in archaeology. So I started my career at AOC with Andy, and I learned more speaking to Andy than I would have in a classroom anywhere, learning about stuff. Same now, being able to come to conference and being able to have conversations with Neil and conversations with Cara, being part of the CIFA Community Archaeology Committee. That's where we learn about the disciplines of every other person and what each other's role brings to the table. So I just encourage everybody to go away from here today and take what you are inspired by from this conference and these conversations that we're having in this room, and talk to the staff that couldn't come. Talk to the fieldwork archaeologists that are out working in the field today that can't be here, because they're the people that you want to continue this conversation. You want your organizations to be inspired by these conversations that we're privileged enough to have. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cara.
I think John's got a question.
If you run round, I'm going to do one.
I'm going to run.
So what I just wanted to bring in, so we've got a representative from the Early Careers SIG on the panel, and we have one of our youth advisory boards, so Katie and Eva. This is really a question. You've obviously been here listening to the conversation today. You are navigating your way through some of these conversations, or are about to. What's the one thing that you would like to see to make this conversation more relevant to you today? Katie, do you want to go first? Oh no, Eva, go. Yeah, please.
I think there's lots of, I think what you were saying about there's lots of different people doing lots of different things. And I think like community archaeology is really cool. And I think, well, from my cohort anyway, we do have quite a wide range of skill sets. Like I did my dissertation in bioarchaeology, but I love doing fieldwork and community archaeology. But then when trying to look for a career, it's very much do field work, and then you can maybe do this, but you probably won't be able to, or go into masters, but then you might have to do, so I think it'd be really cool to be able to say, oh, look, I've got the skill set in community archaeology, and maybe I've not had 10 years of fieldwork experience, but I can bring something now to the community archaeology. And maybe in 5 years' time, I'll go back into fieldwork or something, but I think it really needs to be more flexible, because people are hitting walls as soon as they try into the workforce. And it means that people feel demoralized in their skill set. And I think it'd be so cool if people be more open to different conversations and different entry requirements, for example, even as well.
Absolutely. I would build in exactly off what you just said. Some of my most amazing and talented colleagues are people without archaeology degrees. And I think that can be quite a barrier to, I suppose, and I don't know what the answer to it is. I don't know if it's more openness to conversations like everyone's been saying, and talking to people from managers and higher ups in companies, because a lot of the change that I've seen in my experience has been younger people who come from multidisciplinary backgrounds having to push really, really hard to get into the positions that they're in. It's not those positions being offered to them. And so it has to be people who are really, really driven and really passionate. But you also, one of the hard things about going into field work is that they're, like everyone says, we put things into boxes. So you basically, you can get into archaeology mostly as a fieldwork archaeologist, but that's not where most people want to go or want to stay. And then we struggle to retain those people. And the only people from my generation that I know who have ended up not as fieldwork archaeologists, because I myself, I'm still a fieldwork archaeologist, have basically carved out their own jobs within my company by being amazing, which is inspiring and brilliant, but that wasn't an opportunity that was handed to them, if that makes sense. So I think, yeah, the people who are in power. I'd like to see more help from above, as well as people pushing up from the bottom, if that makes sense.
Sarah Jane.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that as well, that what you were saying about the different entry routes, and that disabled people need those different entry routes as well, because we can't do those physical roles. Not everybody, I mean, everybody's different. So we do need those different roles, and things like driving requirements are a big barrier for people as well. Yeah, so the different roles, we went on exchange with people from the Netherlands who are in a similar charity to us, and we went around all sorts of companies there, and they the big difference was that they do have roles where you can go straight into desk-based roles, so it is possible to do.
I was really comment. I was to support my fellow Scott Andy, and think I'm half full as well. I think we're in a fantastic position historically as a profession. I've been here, gotta feel like a grumpy old man a bit at times, but I try to be a positive old man as well. I mean, I started in the 80s and came through a major depression, shall we say, and it was hard. I mean, things come in cycles, but I think as a profession, we've grown up in that period. We're multidisciplinary. I work for a council. Sorry, John, I work for the City of Edinburgh Council today. And I'm part of multidisciplinary teams. I've got, one of the great challenges of working with the council is, okay, I do know the bin men in Edinburgh, but I mean, that's the only thing I do. But I work in planning. We have flood engineers, environmentalists, educators, comms. There's different ways we can get it, and they all value what we bring, because we actually bring something to the trade. That's a professional. I also work closely with our local field society. They're great people. There's a different dynamics there. I'm also a museum curator, so I've got multiple hats. I don't know how I managed to do it, but that's great, and it's supportive. I think we can support our people going through further, but we are public benefit. That's the core. And I'd like to see that going forward. It's coming. We're almost going back to where we were in the 80s, 90s, where we're, as an ethos, but as a profession, I think we're a lot more professional, a lot more integrated. And actually, if you look at all the communications out there, the media's out there, we're in the public psyche. There's challenges, I think we've talked to you about the succession planning, about books and how we get the story out. But I think we're there, and I say the new generation about new technologies, we embrace it. We embrace new technologies. So I think the challenge is to the board, how do we embrace that and tell our story?
Can I just want to make a comment. I'm from the 1980s, right? I got told when I graduated I wouldn't get a job in archaeology. Did another 2 years in a postgrad. You won't get a job in a museum. It was tough. Then it got better. Now it's got worse. And I think part of the problem we've had with successive austerity measures that have been meted out, particularly in the local authority world, mapping the museum world at the moment, one of the figures that I read the other day was that 140 local authority museums have gone to the wall. About 70 had been created. They're not all museums that have archaeology, by the way. So the net loss is 70 odd museums. There's also the loss of expertise within those museums. So we have cuts to the numbers of people that are working in museums, and therefore less bandwidth. And part of the problem that we've got is that we don't have the resource that we used to have to be able to encourage people to come and work with us for 3 months to do this particular job. Where are the internships that will provide those different skill sets that we were able to get by whatever means when we were in the 1980s or the 1990s? Because with the best will in the world, I'd love to give people work to do in the museum. I work 50% of my hours now because I stopped somebody being made redundant. And that means that I have 50% less time to give to other people that might want to come into the profession. So the challenge I think we've got, all of us, is how do we reimagine the possibility of giving people opportunities to get the skill sets that they need at any level? Because at the moment, that entry level stuff is all disappearing. I think that's really depressing, isn't it? But that's a challenge for us, and we need to meet the challenge.
But I think to add to that, if I might, again, overstepping brief here, but like that's where we really need, like all of us that are established in the sector, we really need to listen to our early career colleagues about those barriers and understand them. Because the barriers that our early career colleagues are facing now are completely different to the barriers that we faced when we were trying to get into a career in archaeology. It's not to say that jobs aren't out there, but there are different barriers that I think still we need to counter, and we need to support our early career colleagues to get into. And I think I just kind of wanted to highlight that. Got one question here, and then we've got a few just down there.
I've got some behind you as well. So I've got some behind. It's all right. Keep going with where you are.
I apologize in advance. It's going to be a bit of a long-winded question. So far, we're talking about a lot of early careers and accessibility. In the yesterday breakout session, especially about, for example, the apprenticeship at the Cirencester College, or all the work about developing the skills through volunteering, it seems to me that we are focusing a lot on certain aspects. And other aspects that I would like to ask the entire panel, from the youngest to the most experienced person, is archaeology by itself. It's a discipline that is at risk as much as the archaeology we deal with. And we've seen this year after year. So is there any chance that you see a devaluation maybe of the profession through certain choices to allow people to more easily get into the career? Or this is a sort of sign that can help the discipline to get out of the bubble we're in? Because we need to be realistic. There is a discrimination between people that have and don't have a degree within certain branches of the industry. So do you see at one point that allowing more people that, for example, start from an apprenticeship without any sort of degree, getting the same opportunities of people that spend 4 or 5 years in the university, do you see them at one point elevating the industry? Or there's a risk that certain, let's call it people from a different timeline of archaeology, will see that as a devaluation of their own skills, something that they think they help build to a certain level and it gets now devaluated?
Would you like to have a go at that comment and think about how the different ways we create archaeologists can still provide different career paths?
Can I?
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting one about apprenticeships versus degrees. I think what we need in archaeology is lots of ways to enter the profession. And I think that needs to be degrees. I think it needs to be apprenticeships. I think it needs to be other routes as well, because we will not have a diversity of people entering if there's not a diversity of routes into the profession. I think as a country, we have had collectively a bit of a step change in how vocational, practical apprenticeship routes have been viewed relative to degrees. All skills are valuable. Practical skills are as equally valuable as the more sort of cerebral academic skills that you learn at university. But as a society, in a drive to encourage anyone who is able to go to university to do that, that has somehow got kind of conflated with degrees are sort of can be higher level than vocational training. Obviously, there's specific cases, if someone's done a PhD and spent 7 years studying and someone's done a 3-month vocational course, that is a different thing. But inherently, there shouldn't be anything different if you have, really honed a skill, whether that is a practical one or a cerebral one. And I think that that's, as a society, we have not addressed. I think that's bigger than archaeology, but I think archaeology needs to address that head on and recognise that particularly if we're hopefully going to start getting apprenticeships in, that will be something we will change. I spend a lot of my time enthusing people in archaeology, and what I am increasingly realising is that I have nowhere to direct those people to. And actually what I'm trying to work on now is giving people in my local area, in the Worcestershire area, opportunities, because it is so demoralising to continually run projects where people are massively enthused, from school children to people wanting to change careers, people out of work looking for opportunities, and being able to send them a really paltry selection of things that aren't even really in our area to do. And we need a really big diversity of things that people can access. And I think apprenticeships are a really good part of that. They can't come soon enough, but I think we probably also need to be thinking broader, things like the CBAs, the youth advocacy program, a whole range of things that people can access at different, depending on how much they want to, do you want to become an archaeologist, or is it, is it something that you're going to do as a hobby and as a pastime? So, yeah, so I guess that was my thoughts on it. Sorry, I was a bit long, but I don't know if anyone else wanted to add.
This is mainly for those who are sort of early or mid-career, but feel free anyone to take a crack at it. And I really want to see your thoughts about what do you see as the future for leadership in archaeology, and what do we put in place now to make sure that our future leaders leave a stronger legacy than the current ones?
Who'd like to start with that? Katie, you look like you're like, I'm going to answer this.
Do you mean what do I want future leadership in archaeology to be, or what do I see future archaeology leadership? Aspirationally. I mean, aspirationally, people like you who've reached out to early committee group members and invited us into spaces where our voices can be heard. That's the best thing, like that we can hope for at the moment. Just there's a lot of conversations that need to be had. There's a lot of linking up between early careers and people at like coming towards the end of their careers that needs to happen, so that we understand each other. Like, so we don't need to argue with each other anymore. We just need to understand each other and be willing to change. And like you were saying about, different entry routes, that's so key. Like I'm in like 70 grand's worth of debt for the job that I'm in now. I didn't need to be. I didn't need those degrees to do this job at all. And yeah, so breaking down barriers and flexibility, and just a willingness to talk, especially at places like this conference, like this is an amazing opportunity for us to not all sit in our cliques, and because archaeology itself is a clique, and then there's lots of cliques within that, and we could just break out of those and talk to each other a bit more. And I think, but it's hard to do that when you're young and nervous, and it needs encouragement, because otherwise it takes some brave and strong-willed people to break out of that. So yeah, lots of mentoring I'd like to see and support.
That's amazing. We've got 3 questions here, but I think we've got 13 minutes left, haven't we? So we can squeeze those in, do you think?
Okay, can we just come to this side a bit first?
Yes.
Sorry, you've not been seeing. I'll do it. I've got one down here. Hang on, Tom, wait. Ladies first. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Claire. I'm actually a placement year student at ASC, so I'm early career and also one of the 21st century born people. I think it's interesting, like for me personally, doing this placement year and getting a taste of commercial archaeology. And then I'm going to go back and do my degree, finish my degree at the end of the year. And I think it's interesting for me when we talk about trying to get people through the door, people of minority backgrounds and really encouraging that, and that's amazing. But I think what I see is there's so much of a low retention rate, especially within field archaeology. It's not particularly a sustainable career job if you can't be in it forever, and there's constant turnover, and I see that all the time. And it's just I just want to ask, how can we focus more on creating a good space for these people to enter into once they enter into that door, once they enter into that career? Because it's great that we're getting people through the door, but if there's not a supportive place for them, then it's kind of selling them like a false promise, really. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to say, Jeanette, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, this is a really good point to bring up, because even within the European Society of Black and Allied Archaeologists, we have these questions a lot. Like when I I used to work at the British Museum when in 2020, and there were a lot of these conversations happening, and it got to the point where you start thinking, okay, I've made it into certain spaces within the industry, and I want to open the door for other people, right? Because that's one way of things changing, right? When the demographics change, or at least reflect society. But then you start thinking about everything that you've been through, and you start to question, it's like, can I, in good faith, recommend this career to anyone else, right? When I know that my presence hasn't been enough to change very much. So it's a difficult one, for sure, because there's so much work to do. I think we forget the legacy that of archaeology, how it originated, that it hasn't been so long since it started to become a profession, and that there's a lot of work to do. It doesn't affect everyone in the sector equally, so not everyone is going to make time to understand how it impacts their staff. I worked in commercial as well for 5 years, and sometimes the people who make it aren't the ones who were the hardest working, or they had the most passion. They just they hung on, right? They hung on to the bad and just sort of hoped that it would get better. So this isn't really providing an answer, but rather that it's a conversation that everyone needs to take part in. The question I used to ask people, it may be different now, but in your careers, how many people have you worked alongside that spoke a different language to you, or came from a different country, or looked different to you, had a different religion? You know, even in my experience, it hasn't been that many, especially working in the UK. And it's like, well, if you can't think of, if you can count them on one hand, if that much. Well, why do you think that is? What kind of culture is fostered in commercial units? You're asking people who, and it's not just about like an ethnic or a religion a minority, like disability as well. You're asking people to sort of share accommodation with folks who might have vastly different opinions to you, or who might disregard your lived experience, right? You're asking people to go through that for what? For what, minimum wage job? For something that, they might work for 5 months and then not have another job? It's a big ask.
Yeah. So Neil mentioned finite and non-renewable as a phrase, and perhaps a philosophy that maybe no longer serves us as a sector. And in that context, and thinking about current planning reform and things like biodiversity net gain, and the move from thinking about mitigating impacts and impact assessments to delivering outcomes and outcome reporting, I'm interested if the panel sees a future world where we could have, for want of a better word, archaeology net gain, and what that might look like.
Right, I'll have a go. Good question, Tom. Wow. Well, I mean, to begin with, we have to understand what's gaining. And that's really where this whole argument falls down. We're terrifically bad at baselining where we're starting from, although there's been some speakers today who've stared into the abyss. And that's the place that we have to start from. So understanding the impact that we make, the change we make, understanding our beneficiaries, understanding what change we're making for them, and then having a framework to evidence that is the first place. And I can't see very many places in the sector that are really grasping that nettle. So yes, I want to believe that is the future. In fact, it has to be. Because we have to join up with other adjacent fields that are already having that conversation and are already hanging a body of science and philosophy around what that means, and we have to join up with that. So yeah, I mean that's the goal, isn't it? That's where the funding flows in, that's where we stop having arguments about pathways into the profession. That's where we stop having issues with leadership, because it addresses it at a systemic level. All these issues that are being described are systemic issues, not personal failings. It's because those issues are baked into the business model, as Kenny told us today, employs 75% of all archaeologists. We only address that by having the confidence and imagination to try alternative approaches, just like you described, just like Gail described earlier.
I just want, when you say net gain, how are we going to measure that? Okay, so what is a net gain? Museums, we come under Arts Council England. There are agendas that we've been having to meet for years in terms of social justice, health and well-being. We can measure the number of people that are come in, but actually I don't think we're really measuring impact. And some of those impacts you can't measure until 10 years later, 15 years later, because it's something that you might have done that's affected somebody's life. So I know that I've had impact because people have told me. How I measure that impact, I don't know how to do that necessarily. There's a very long-term view. It's not an immediate thing that you could put in front of somebody. But I do know the museum world has been measuring what it does in terms of other agendas, social agendas, for a long time.
Can I say something? But sorry, a bit closer. I did come across one study as well where they looked into high profit turning companies, and they found that those that do employ disabled people and make it a welcoming place for disabled people do actually have higher profit margins. And it also improves the well-being of other staff if you employ disabled people.
Right, thank you. Time's pushing on. So, Cara, I think you had one more question.
Got one more quick question, Kevin. Is that possible?
It's a statement and a question. I mean, I think Brendan has just about hit on it. The problem why we're going to have continuous problems is that the business model, which is commercial archaeology has created, is unsustainable. Basically, the longer it carries on, the more difficult the problems. Fortunately, Brendan and Lisa have decided to take a different route, which is great. There is an alternative. But, you know, I was speaking to Dave Connolly from Badger a few years ago, and he was talking about how we should be developing what he called portfolio careers. So that if you want to come along and be an archaeologist, you shouldn't forget you can also be a teacher or a geologist or even working in a care home. That, you know, we kind of put our talents to where we want to be working at a time. But archaeology then has to let us back in when we want to come back in. And that's where the business model that's created at the moment doesn't allow for.
Okay. I think
Something to say, Andy? No.
Okay. It's all right. You can have silence on that one if you want. I think it was a statement. I think it's a really valid statement, but we definitely don't, in 3.5 minutes, have time to necessarily unpack all of that one. I do have one question that I just like to put, and I'm going to actually put it to Andy and John in the audience. So the CBA operates across the UK, and Andy, I was really touched with what you said about being optimistic. And I would like to know, is part of your optimism due to the fact that in Scotland there is a very clear archaeological strategy, whereas in England there is not?
Yeah, so I'm optimistic. If I put two hats on, so AOC, you know, I can only talk about AOC, not talk about commercial archaeology. So 4 of my mates are also the owners of AOC, and they started at university different times with me. So no, I get career paths are difficult. I'm very active at trying to solve that, but there are some good case studies out there that show you can go from an undergraduate with your mates to run quite a good company, I think. In terms of Scottish archaeology strategy, yeah, the reason I'm optimistic is, and you probably don't know this, so there's a thing called the Scottish Archaeology Strategy. It was written over 10 years ago. We're doing a review at the moment. We're waiting to do it. I've been chair for 5 years, and to be blunt, when it started, it was probably like most archaeology, quite disparate. There was different member groups. Matt was involved in the beginning. And the big thing that's happened over 10 years, and it's not been easy, is literally there's now almost one voice. So it doesn't matter if it's SIFA or algae, people have been doing archaeology for 25 years, is that people who generally worked in silos, they don't work in silos now. So there's a clear vision, there's a clear strategy, and everybody leaves their job title or whatever at the door, and they work together in support and partnership. And it's very outcome driven. So it's not just talking, it's, we're going to do that, let's do that, here it is, you do a report. And it has a huge effect. So it's completely changed the funding structure in archaeology. It funds a lot of the AIM leads. It leads to partnership, collaboration, etc., etc. Yeah, it is a fantastic model, and I think collaborative working, and I think talking down quite a lot, enjoying the tragedy of things that don't work. Yeah, there's lots of opportunities, and the Scottish Archaeology Strategy, I think, is a good outcome of that, and people who are involved in it can vouch, not just me saying that, I think it's true.
Brilliant. Thank you. We did ask the panel one final question to prepare, and I am going to ask them this question. And in part, I know there is a very good artist on the panel, and so they did inspire this question. So the final question for each of the panel, I'm going to go left to right with this question. If archaeology was an art form, what art form would it be and why? Nina.
This is a quite out there question. I'm glad I had this one in advance. I think it'd be sculpture. I don't know if this is a slightly cop-out answer, but I think what really sets archaeology apart is the physical nature of it. I think the fact you can hold stuff from the past, and that's kind of integral to our storytelling. Lots of professions do storytelling, but I would pick something that's got that physical side to it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Brendan.
Good. At the risk of killing this one dead, I didn't understand the question. Archaeology is an art form. If you were to say what's the what kind of sport would contemporary dance be? Well, it would be boxing. Float like a butterfly, sing like a bee, or the other way around, depending. Well, you can't do that with archaeology because that's what it does. It's this social and cultural intervention, an artistic intervention into now that arrests you, that can be uncomfortable, that can delight you, that can challenge you. So to me, archaeology is an art form.
Thank you very much indeed. Andy.
It would be a Jackson Pollock painting.
Yep. Brilliant. Love it. Jeanette.
All right, so maybe because I've just come back from visiting my parents in New York, but I thought of it as sort of like 1970s, 1980s graffiti artwork from the Bronx. And that is because, well, I wrote a whole list, but we don't have time. And it's because both archaeology and graffiti as an art form can be seen as lacking merit in their spheres and by extension unworthy of respect. And because both of them have no purpose if it's not done in the service of community.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sarah Jane.
Well, for a while, I did always want to be an archaeologist, but I also played for Lancashire Youth Orchestra, and so I did look at going to music college instead of archaeology. So my answer is second orchestra, and you would often go into your sort of woodwind sectional, and I think we're all kind of like sectionals that then practice, and we come together to kind of, we're all busy working away, doing things, and then we come together to kind of talk about things like we're doing today, and it would fail without all these different performers.
Love that. Katie?
I was going to go down the same route as earlier of that it's already an art form. It's storytelling. We're all storytellers, so we're all authors and creatives. And, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Eva?
My answer was a bit different, but I was going to say tap dancing, which because I think that there's like you learn basics of it, whatever, but everyone goes off and does different things with it. You can teach and dance and do different shows and stuff, and I thought that was similar.
Brilliant. Love that. Thank you, Katie. And finally, Gail.
So mine isn't one particular piece of art, but actually a whole genre of art, which is conceptual art. Because conceptual art can be anything that you want it to be. It can be made out of anything that you want it to be made out of. It's quite difficult to understand if you don't know what the message is. So you have to be really good. And I've actually conceived of this work of art. And this work of art consists of a box. It doesn't matter what size, whether it fits on a shelf, whatever box you want it to be, and there is nothing in it, and except the word archaeology, because the title of this work is Thinking Outside of the Box. So archaeology is there, and we need to think around it. So it's a piece of conceptual art.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Ladies and gents, thank our panel who have been excellent. Thank you, Cara. The plenary session is going to be in here, so if you want to stay, you can do. Just one thing I would like, being the therapists of deep time, I think there is a real need for archaeologists to understand that they are the therapists of each other. And if you know professional therapy, they all have to have peer support, which is talking to people in their profession about how they're doing. And actually, we need to do more of these conversations to actually understand how we navigate through some of these actual challenges. So again, I would encourage you to go away and really think about that idea of us as the therapists of deep time, really about how we work with our minds. But thank you all very much.
Good.